Baron Trump stood quietly in the doorway, a place he rarely occupied, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his sleeves. It was late, and the study was bathed in the soft, golden glow of the desk lamp. Donald Trump, his father, was seated at the desk, surrounded by papers, his face tense with concentration as he looked through important documents. The quiet ticking of the antique clock in the corner punctuated the stillness, and Baron felt a strange weight in his chest. "Baron?" His father's voice cut through the silence. "Everything okay?" Baron hesitated, his throat tight, unsure if he was ready to ask the question he had been carrying for days, maybe weeks. He had never been the type to engage in idle conversation, always quiet, always observing. But tonight was different. There was something heavy in the air, something unsettling, and the world outside felt more chaotic than ever. He took a step forward, finally speaking, though his voice was quieter than he had intended. "Dad," he began, and Donald looked up, setting the papers aside, his expression softening when he saw the troubled look in his son's eyes. "I need to ask you something important." Donald nodded, his gaze turning serious. "Go ahead, son. What's on your mind?" Baron's voice shook slightly as he continued. "I've been watching the news, seeing what's happening around the country. People seem more divided than ever. There's anger, violence, hopelessness. It feels like the country is tearing apart." Donald stood slowly, a thoughtful frown crossing his face as he walked to the large window. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the city skyline, deep in thought. Baron's heart raced, sensing the gravity of the moment. He continued, his words coming out softer now, filled with an earnestness that even surprised him. "I guess what I'm really asking is, Dad, is America dying?" The bluntness of the question seemed to hang in the air, thick and heavy. Donald remained silent, his back still turned to Baron, his hands resting lightly on the windowsill as he considered the question. Finally, Donald exhaled, his voice low but steady. "Why do you ask, Baron?" Baron struggled to put his feelings into words. "Because everywhere I look, it feels like things are only getting worse. The country seems to be losing itself. People aren't just disagreeing, they're hating each other. Families can't even talk anymore without fighting. Friends are torn apart. It feels like we're falling apart, Dad." Donald turned to face his son, his expression serious, but there was something softer there too. Something unspoken. "What do you think, Baron? Do you think it's dying?" Baron hesitated, his gaze dropping momentarily to the floor before meeting his father's. "Honestly, I don't know, but sometimes it feels like we're heading that way, like it's too far gone." A long silence passed between them. The room seemed to grow colder, though the air hadn't changed at all. Donald's gaze was unwavering, thoughtful. Finally, he stepped forward and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. His voice was surprisingly gentle. "I've asked myself the same question, son," he said quietly. Baron's eyes widened slightly. He had expected a quick dismissal, a reassuring answer, but instead, his father's vulnerability took him by surprise. Baron searched his father's face, hoping for some clarity. "And what did you find?" Donald let out a long breath, his eyes distant. "The answer is complicated, Baron. America isn't just a country. It's an idea, and ideas don't die easily. They survive wars, they survive crises, they survive even the deepest divisions." Baron listened intently, absorbing every word. "But," Donald continued, his tone growing more serious, "they can die if we let them. If we lose hope, if we abandon our principles, then yes, it could die. But I don't think that's where we are yet." Baron felt the weight of his father's words, though something in him remained unsettled. "How do we know if it's too late? How do we know if we can fix it before it's gone?" Donald placed his hand on Baron's shoulder, his grip firm yet comforting. "It's never too late, Baron. As long as there are people who believe America is worth fighting for, as long as there's someone willing to stand up and keep hope alive, it's not over." Baron exhaled slowly, his mind still racing, but he could feel something starting to shift inside him. "So what do we do? How do we know if we're doing enough?" Donald gave his son a reassuring smile, his voice softening. "You keep fighting. You keep asking questions. And you remind people why America matters. The question isn't whether America is dying, son. The question is whether we have the courage to keep it alive. And as long as you're here, as long as there are people like you who believe in what this country can be, it will always have a chance." Baron was quiet, his mind turning over his father's words. But there was still one more thing he had to ask, one last thing that had been nagging at him for so long. "But how do we know if people will listen, if they'll change?" he asked quietly, almost unsure if he even wanted the answer. Donald leaned in closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Sometimes it's hard to see the change, Baron. People are scared right now, afraid of losing what they know. But what you have to remember is this. America's strength doesn't come from always being right. It comes from learning from our mistakes, from standing back up when we fall, It's not perfect, but it's always striving to be better. Baron looked at his father, still unsure, but something in his heart began to stir. I think I understand. But there's so much hate right now, Dad, so much anger. Can we ever stop it? Donald sighed softly, his expression softening even further. Hate is a powerful thing, Baron. It thrives in darkness where there's no hope. It feeds on fear, but that's the thing about hate. It's not unstoppable. It only wins when we stop believing in each other. If we want to defeat hate, we need to show people what's worth believing in. Baron nodded slowly, processing everything his father had said. His thoughts were still a blur, but there was something about the conversation that felt grounding, like he had learned something important that he could carry forward. Before he could say more, the door creaked open, and Melania stepped into the room. Her presence was quiet but strong, and she looked at Baron and Donald with a gentle expression. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said softly, but I overheard part of your conversation. Baron looked at his mother, his heart still full of questions. Mom, do you think America is dying? Melania sat down beside them, her eyes thoughtful. No, Baron. America isn't dying, it's hurting, and when people hurt, they forget who they are. They forget what made them strong. Baron's brow furrowed, his confusion growing, but it feels like everyone's yelling. Nobody's listening anymore. Melania nodded slowly, her voice steady but filled with understanding. When your heart hurts, it's hard to hear anything. Right now, America's heart is wounded, but hearts heal. They always heal, if we give them the time and the care they need. Baron absorbed her words, though he still wasn't sure what all of it meant for him. But how do we fix it then? How do we stop it from getting worse? Melania looked at her son with soft eyes, her expression full of empathy. You fix it by not letting it break you. You fix it by being the one who keeps hope alive. You listen, even when it's hard, and you remind people of who they really are. Baron thought about this for a moment. So, what should I do? Melania smiled gently. You show them what's possible when we choose to listen, even when we disagree. You become someone who refuses to give up on America no matter how hard things get. Donald nodded in agreement, adding, the future is in your hands now, Baron. It's up to your generation to lead the way. Baron felt the weight of his parents' words settle on him, but there was also a flicker of hope that began to grow within him. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as he kept asking questions, as long as he kept believing, there was still a chance. Later that night, as Baron sat alone in his room, looking out at the star-filled sky, he reflected on everything his parents had said. It felt like his whole perspective on the world had shifted, like he had glimpsed a path forward, even in the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, America would be okay.